Right on. I am super excited to talk to the people in front of me, but I'm going to introduce them first. So bear with my waxing poetic about all of y'all. Lisa Yun Lee is a cultural activist and the executive director of the National Public Housing Museum. She is also an associate professor in art history and gender and women's studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago, teaching faculty with the Prison Neighborhood Art Project, and a member of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. Lisa served as a co-chair of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Arts and Culture Transition Team and is currently on the Mayor's Committee for the Evaluation of Monuments, Memorials, and Historical Reckoning. She is writing a book for Teachers College Press about Jane Addams and serves on the boards of the Field Foundation, 3 Arts, and the Illinois State Museum. Welcome, Lisa. A round of applause for Lisa. Really excited. And sitting beautifully next to Lisa is Antonius-Tín, is a multidisciplinary artist whose work traverses the realms of hand-cut paper, community engagement, performance, and soft sculpture to visualize hybrid identities or histories that confront the unsettling present. Bui's hybridized identity as a queer, gender fluid, and Vietnamese American informs the way they employ beauty as a refuge for fellow marginalized communities. Their intensive paper cutting process is exceptionally meditative. Each sheet of paper represents an archive of memories and oral histories mirroring the intergenerational trauma that so many refugee communities are faced with. Through their rigorous and reductive process, they deconstruct the white canvas, metaphorically carving out space for the narratives that are so often omitted from recognized histories. Welcome, Antonius. Glad to have you with us. I'm going to skip over here to my right to Shinique Smith. Shinique Smith is known for her monumental fabric sculptures and abstract paintings of calligraphy and collage. Born to a young fashion designer who is also a visionary thinker, Smith was exposed to an array of inspirational childhood experiences that include chanting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, attending fashion shows in New York and Paris, and studying ballet, piano, and visual art from the age of 4. Smith attended the famed Baltimore School for the Arts, where she began honing her hand through life drawing and tagging with a local graffiti crew. Smith's personal histories and belongings intertwine with thoughts of the vast nature of things that we consume and discard, and how these objects resonate on intimate and social scales. Over the last 20 years, Smith has gleaned visual poetry from clothing and explored concepts of ritual using breath, bunding, and calligraphy as tools toward abstraction. Her layered works range from palm-sized bundled microcosms to monolithic bales to massive chaotic paintings that contain vibrant and carefully collected mementos from her life. Smith's practice operates at the convergence of consumption and spiritual sanctuary, balancing forces and revealing connecting across space, time, race, gender, and place to suggest new worlds of possibility. All right, Shinique. And last and tallest is Jake Troyli, whose work investigates the construction of otherness and the commodification of Black-brown bodies, confronting and exploring labor, capitalism, and sweat equity as demonstration of value. He makes energetic paintings, often featuring a self-portrait or avatar of himself embedded in engaging scenes with a markedly classicist approach. Utilizing techniques formalized during the High Renaissance, underpainting and toning are central to the conception of each work, beginning with a burnt sienna foundation to establish values. In a timely evolution of his practice, Troyli expands the functionality and influence of his figures, imbuing them with new agency and establishing absurd narratives to consider the timeless conversations surrounding the preconceived notions of identity, value, and structures. Through the presence of prop-like iconography and compositions reminiscent of community theater sets, Troyli positions his figures as performing commodities constantly on display. Welcome, Jake. Welcome, everybody. Let's get this started. When I first came to the idea of talking to y'all on a Four Freedoms platform, I was thinking a lot about freedom, naturally, and really thinking about what freedom means to individuals. And as we fight for freedom on this platform that is Four Freedoms, and we try to make impact, social impact, with what we champion as freedom personally and societally, I started thinking about the tensions that I have to hold personally with holding the freedom for the collective, holding it for myself, and then the process that I use to create and distribute that freedom. I became really curious about each of your individual processes, and I'll start with you, Antonius. The thing that I was really thinking about when I saw your pieces is it flashed me back to some youth, time in my early identity. And for whatever reason, the textures reminded me of a coat that I wore at an 11-year-old gathering of my family. And I had not quite figured out what I wanted to do with myself in that gathering, but somehow felt power. So when I looked at your images, I was feeling like this, all these layers of power that are like hidden in the images, but also like are integrated somehow. So my curiosity is like, as you hold all of these different nuanced identities of who you are, what, first of all, is an art identity? Like, can we define an art identity? How is that art identity separate from who you are in other realms of your life? And how does the social change stage bend or liberate or oppress that identity?
Thank you so much for that, Toni. And I love imagining you as an 11-year-old. I think lately, in addition to the beautiful introduction, I just identify as an eternal student, evolving failure, and polydisciplinary artist that attempts to be ever new on a daily basis. And when I think of freedom, it's hard not to think about one's freedom at the expense of another person, ecosystem, creature in a capitalistic society. And so I love that you brought up 11-year-old you, because I think many of us at 11 had a more expansive idea of identity. We saw ourselves in the sandbox, in the pool, the water, the creatures around us. And it's so important to begin decentering humans when we conceptualize freedom. And I have a dear friend named Ari who was born and raised in Bali. And being around her, she's just effervescent. Like, she's always like, wait. Like, we literally can't get anywhere on time because she's like, there's a salamander. Like, let's say hi to it. Or like, can we just acknowledge how much this plant has grown in the past week? And in Balinese culture, there's a term called sakti, and it's honoring the spiritual essence of other beings. And I think for me, I've been just trying to pray more, not describe and analyze things, but to talk to the world as it is an equivalence, and really hone in on the spiritual aspect of freedom.
I like that you have a narrative that is more spiritually based and informs your practice. But what are you listening to in the public discourse? And I'll ask each of you that question, because, you know, what I love about the Four Freedoms platform is it inspiring us to really listen into what the public discourse is around our civic responsibilities, our civic responses. How do we then, you know, I internalize that as my personal freedom, then it becomes a collective freedom. But then the platform starts to shift it a little bit. What are you listening to in civic discourse, and how is it informing your practice?
Lately, I've been listening to silence, really honoring the importance of softness, slowness, and silence. Really understanding how we, like, really trying to listen to my inner compass, understand where I want to put my time and energy with this singular life. And so I'm in a space of like deep reflection, having to confront how slow I am to change.
Can you put the microphone a little bit closer to you so we can
Oh,
hear
yes.
you?
Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Perfect.
I think, and I've been really prioritizing softness, slowness, and silence because I'm coming to terms with how slow I am to change. And I always expect society to change, policies to change, all of that. But for me, I'm still dealing with my mommy and daddy issues, and I'm 31, you know? And so I'm trying to have more grace with myself. And in doing so, I find myself being open to more difficult conversations, having more empathy with people with different political views. And so I'm in a stage of unknowing and rediscovering, to be completely honest.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to ask the rest of you all that question too. Lisa, I'm going to pitch to you for a second. When I think about your work, I think about, art as archive, like what are we collecting? What is the data that we're collecting? What are we doing with that data? Who gets to decide if it's important enough to keep as memory? And how do you decide what gets archived and what gets listened to in our public discourse?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I love that you ask about listening because I truly do believe that listening is the cornerstone of a radical democracy. And my grandmother used to always say to me, listening is not just waiting for your turn to talk, which I think actually that's what most people think listening actually is. And even though now I'm at the National Public Housing Museum, so much of what I do is informed by my time when I was at the Hull House and Jane Addams and that group of radical reformers who created so much change from Chicago, so much change as women, even before women had the right to vote, right? So they hadn't limited their sense of what civic action is to just electoral politics. They saw it as so much more expansive. And one of the first things that Jane Addams did when she came to the near west side of Chicago and met with all the immigrants is she did what a lot of us do, is have a dinner party. And she invited the Italian immigrants to come in, and they were like, no, like, you're this white lady, we're gonna cook tonight. And she writes home to her parents and they say, oh my gosh, we had the most incredible food. It was this macaroni with meat that was boiled forever in tomato sauce, and it was delicious. It was the first time she had spaghetti bolognese, right? And when she moved to the West Side, she thought that she understood what was good, what was true, and what was beautiful, and she was going to offer it to the immigrants. But literally, her taste, like metaphorically and literally, changed that evening when she realized that you have to actually allow each of us to determine what is beautiful and what is true and what is just. It wasn't just there was one sense of what is beautiful. And so she went around the neighborhood and just listened to what other people, the Irish poets, right, the sort of Greek immigrants and all the people and sort of what their stories are. And something that I'm doing now is creating the largest archive of public housing stories at the National Public Housing Museum. And these stories are filled with incredible dreams of what people wanted to do and also dreams deferred of what they weren't allowed to do. And something about freedom, and this is something that Eric Foner writes a lot about, is that we sometimes have notions of your freedom from, which is really important. Like, you want to be free from hunger, free from whatever. But he says the times that we are most radically free, it's when it's a freedom to, like a positive notion of what that freedom is. And so when I'm sort of listening to the stories and we're putting them in the archive and sort of insisting that never again will a single story be told as if it's the only one, we're always trying to listen to the stories that are marginalized, are not sort of, that are challenging sort of the mainstream narratives of what we think, especially around public housing, which has been so coded in a racialized history, and people don't know who lived there, what was it. And so I'm trying to pull in all that affect of not just trauma and terror and sort of policing, but also the sort of feelings of radical joy, of friendship, of every single, like what it means to be human, which is this amazing, capacious sense of what it, like what you feel, sort of what you were bringing up too, you know, just in that kind of way. So that's really, and you know, you let the story guide you. And there's a beautiful quote that Rebecca Solnit says, which is, no matter how often you tell a story or how much you promote it, you have to remember it's not your story. So as somebody who's building an archive, you just realize that this cultural capital that each and every one of us has and each and every community has, which is our stories that deserve to be preserved, listened to, interpreted, and shared. It's not like the archive story to share, but it always belongs to that individual still.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I really like free from versus free to. And it makes me think about that tension again. I'm going to come to you, Shinique, because when I was looking at your work, I was thinking a lot about something about your images. It suspends the finite. It's something expansive happens when I look at them. It makes me feel like something transmutational is taking place, and that I make up that you've taken something that isn't necessarily lovely and you start to transmute that into something more expansive. It feels like levity to me. And then I think about, and I don't know if I'm right, I'm just curious. It makes me think about, is there a tension that you hold between, you know, because the civic responsibility can make you feel like you're focused on the free from versus the free to. And so I think about that tension of like, I want to be able to transmute pain, but sometimes that feels like an abandonment to, you know, the message. Do you struggle with the one in you who wants to be free from something versus the one who wants to be free to?
That's a lot of statement within that. I don't feel like I do. I feel like I've been striving for a long time for balance between the free from and the free to. It's okay to say both. It's important to have both. You're free from fear and you're free to feel joy. They go hand in hand. Love and pain go hand in hand. There are these dualisms in our realm that I sometimes have struggled to balance, but my whole thing is about balancing those out. And my work, first off, what you said before at the beginning about freedom, it was so beautiful. And all of what you were talking about a unified view of the world and our place in it, I totally feel you on that. And that's part of what I strive for personally. And that goes to the work, because in my work, I'm creating connections, networks between objects that make you feel like you belong to what you have, what you don't have. But they're all belongings at some point that were loved and cherished by me or my family. It's not so much discarded material. And so some of it is actually beautiful at the get-go. And then it's comes together. Some is ugly, but the world. It's beautiful, it's ugly. I'm putting all those things together and trying to make something new. And in the journey of that, I am imbuing it with my own hand and body and emotion and the things that are going on in the world. And, the world levity, we discussed this. I have a problem with that because it kind of talks to frivolity and happiness. And I don't think of my work in that way. There is a joy that is riding alongside sadness or melancholy in the things that are going on in the world. And because I am free to be grateful for what I have when people don't have something. I'm able to give more when I can live within the gratitude and recognition of it all. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question there. What was the question?
You did. You did. I think you got it.
Okay.
Gratitude of recognition. Let's talk about. I like that phrase that you just. I think about the gratitude of recognition. I think about recognition. Period. Some of the things that I was thinking about when I was looking at your images, Jake, particularly the expressions on some of your self portraits, and them being so flat. And I think about the social change stage sometimes when I'm thinking about this recognition part of, my personal beliefs sometimes can get mangled when it's churned through what it has to mean for someone else. Just the word levity and how we were going back and forth, like how I hold it, right? But how I hold it and how it's held outside of my body are two different things. When I look at your work, Jake, I think about the expression and I project that there is fatigue in the recognition, in the entertainment of pain pimping is what I call it, is why do we have to, like the only time my pain becomes seductive is when it is in the form of entertainment or pain pimping the platform so that I can get the recognition and the gratitude, but I have to throw pain up to get it before I throw my liberation up. And I think, and then I become curious about, are you tired of that? Are you fatigued? And is that what those expressions represent?
I think, yes. Fatigue is something that I think about a lot in my work. I'm really interested in like spectator and spectacle, what it means to be on display, that strange pedestal and like what the pedestal can bring, which I think is this like vibration between empowerment and hyper vulnerability. So these figures are sort of, I want to be self-critical, I guess, in my work. And I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that, yes, like we're performing, right? The relationship, the dynamic between the performer and the audience are so interconnected because neither can exist without the other. And so there is this like need to be seen, but at what expense? So I do think about fatigue, but I also I want to kind of portray this almost complicit impassivity, like the figures are part of these cycles and part of these systems, but they're also performing a role kind of ad nauseum and over. And so there's this sort of like cyclical, futile space that I want the work to exist in.
Now it's open season, y'all. I have questions for everybody.
Can I hop in for one
Yeah.
thing that I was just thinking about for I love what you were saying about the kind of trans species recognition, because I was thinking also just in my own work when you're like, how do you tell a story so people listen and that it doesn't re-traumatize the storyteller over and
Yes.
over again,
Yes.
right? And also for like the images, how do you do it so you aren't objectifying that and you're representing in a way that the full subjectivity of that person. And I think, we treat objects and other people like we objectify them, but to recognize their subjectivity and to give them their full agency is so much when I see your work and sort of what you were talking about too. And like that's the art of it. Like I feel like that's the art of curation also when we're trying to not like just have poverty porn and show how people are living, or demo porn, how the building's coming down. There are people who aestheticize that, and they sort of see that. But I think the aestheticization is that objectification. And one last thing I just want to say is that there's this beautiful quote, because I have other identity as an Adorno scholar. Some people know what that means, some people don't. But he sort of there's a beautiful quote about freedom where he's like, you must realize that at the magical moment is when you realize that you become free when you become in relationship with the other. It's not that you are free from the other or that you are oppressing the other, but it's only together that we can achieve our freedom. And I kind of love that so much. And I'm feeling that with this panel.
Question. What are you tired of hearing? We've been talking a lot about listening and how listening informs what it is we do. But what are you fatigued? I'm going to pick up where I left off with Jake. Like, what are you tired of listening to? And what do you believe the fatigue is? And, we've got an election coming up. We're already tired. I'm already worn out at what I'm listening to. How do you stay inspired? What have you grown tired of listening to? And how do you flip that into something that can be inspiring?
I'll take it. When the word inspiration always gets me because I'm interested in. I actually think that art making is a compulsive act. I think of it as a compulsion, and I think actually in times of fatigue and times of just sort of, this year, I feel that this is when we have to make the most work because it's how we sort of make sense of what's happening around us, which is also, I think, for me, it's necessary. It's the only way to kind of exercise what it is that's happening in your head. And especially in a year like this and in a time like this, I think it's just like a vital part. Honestly, we have to be in this space where we are just making. And that's the liberating, I think, part of being an artist, because you have this visual ability to kind of iterate what's going on around you. So for me, it's inspiration galore,
What's hard? What do you find hard being inspired by?
Well, okay, you talked about sort of trauma porn earlier, right? I don't like that. And that's something that I think about in my work. And this kind of touches on what Shinique was saying about this tension between things and sort of rain and sunshine and having these things butt up against each other. I think that's why I use this sort of illustrative graphic palette, and I try to use humor in my work as this way of creating this much more complex statement.
It's always a sunny day.
Yeah, right.
In your work.
Yeah.
There's no rain.
Totally. And I'm interested in, I think about that as this sort of crafted utopian set. It's a set, it's a stage. And I do think that that's how we can create more complex imagery that can act as more of a Trojan horse to kind of get us into a larger conversation.
Thank you, Jake. What about you, Antonius? What are you tired of hearing?
Oh, I'm thinking about the importance of making and how I so wish that many people embody the artistic practice, especially its emphasis on critique and experimentation. What you see in this fair is just a fraction of what all of us make on a daily basis. And if organizations, nonprofits, governments were able to embrace failure more and accept feedback, then I think we could get somewhere. And that's why artists are like a portal for everyone else towards utopia.
I love that.
And sorry, I was going to say, this is something I'm not tired of hearing, but I want to hear more, is white people talking about whiteness and deconstructing that on their own. I don't always want to hear it, but I want to see it, But have those conversations,
And the safe spaces to do it, I think as I was in a program for a while where we were doing these kind of dialogues and unity dialogues, and I felt like the best gift would be, we're always trying to find our safe spaces. Where are their safe spaces to peel back and figure out what went wrong. So I appreciate that comment. Now I'm going to switch a little bit. Who else wants? Shinique, do you have anything about the idea of like what you might be tired of, or what you might be having a hard time being inspired by? Everything inspires you.
Well, we talked about this too. I guess the things that it's an irritation
Hold the mic
that
up. Yeah. Just so people can hear.
it's like the irritation in the oyster, the bit of sand. Whatever is going on and whatever's around to compel me towards something. I do avoid certain things, but that's just personal stuff.
All right. So as we get closer to this election, what do you want people to hold or know? How can they hold this? What would you be your advice to your peer artist community as well as just public at large as we get closer to this election? What do you want people to be inspired by, or not listen to, or listen to more of?
I can't, I guess, answer that in terms of the election, but one of the things that I think about a lot is access and how we can create sort of portals of access into being an artist for people that may not necessarily feel like they have that access, which has always been super important to me. And it's something that I think about when I'm making imagery. I come from a place where like a lot of people don't see being an artist as like actually a possibility. And I'm always interested in how we can dismantle that, because this idea of, I think especially in the art world, like access is a radical idea. Like people, I mean, it's in a lot of ways purposefully exclusionary, but like I want to think about that. How can we like make windows for people to feel like they can express themselves? Because I think that's kind of the most important thing. Like if we have people that can sort of work through what they have to do and make the work that they have to make, and sort of lean into the compulsion that we talked about earlier. And when I think about freedom, right, that's like one of the things that I think about the most. So I just thought that was kind of an important thing to talk about.
Thank you.
I would, within this realm of politics and where we are, I would really like if people reached across the aisle more. We're so polarized in our beliefs and understandings of things that that's why we're where we are. People who are like-minded are pretty much in this room. So if you could also open up and talk to those Trumpers or whoever, they have feelings and families too. Believe it or not, I'm sure. And I think that the more dialogue we have with people who are of opposing opinions, the more we share why we feel that this is infringing on certain people's freedoms or whatever, the more they are likely to maybe open a mind and understand, instead of staying in our groups of like-mindedness, reposting to each other what we already know and believe. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm sick of. Yeah, I'm sick of that.
Right on. Now
I also agree. I feel like having radical generosity and not just being against a position, but trying to understand how somebody came to that position is so important. And I also think, though, that even in this room, ostensibly, it might seem that we agree, but I would put big money that we do not agree. And so that there's actually a lot of disagreement amongst ourselves also that I think it's good and important to explore. And just for the election, because the DNC is in Chicago and everybody is geared up for this moment, of course, it's so important to vote. But just like what I was saying about the Hull House, it's like electoral politics is voting is just one part of it. And my good friend Barbara Ransby always says, voting is like brushing your teeth for your health. You should do it all the time, But it's not the only thing that you should do in order to like actually be healthy, right? And there's like a kind of way that we have to focus on movement building in between election periods and really value. I mean, places why I value this panel and this work of Expo is like there's so much unmaking and destruction in the world, and we should take seriously the people who are committed to creation and making, right? And really valuing the makers. And yeah.
Thank you. Big ups on that one. So we're on a social change stage right now, right? There's a lot of rooms in this space functioning as a social change space and its stage. But I think about a lot of what the stage does to the message in both helping it and oppressing it. What is the hardest and most liberating thing that you've offered the social change stage? How, and I mean the hardest, meaning in order for it to be ready for consumption, you have to move it in a certain way in order for it to be attractive for that consumption. And then there's also the big possibility of once it's consumed, what it frees, what it liberates. So what has been challenging to put on that platform, wherever it is, meaning it's mangled you or your message somehow, and what has been like, once it hit the stage, it got total wind and freedom and space.
If our interpersonal relationships are a microcosm of the macrocosm, I'm realizing just how difficult it is to accept fault and truly mend a relationship, understanding reconciliation and forgiveness as a collaborative act. And I really need to work on my own friendships, my partnership, my relationship with my parents, and understand that that's a huge part of the work as well.
I think it's always sort of like a vulnerable space to put work out into the world, especially if you are, trying to say something, right? And I struggle with this a lot, and I think some of the same things that I'm interested in when we talk about tension within my work are the same things that sort of can be like things I have to really think about when I put it out into the world, because there is the capacity for a viewer to sort of just flatten it into, this like sort of funny thing. And, but again, I have to make it. So I have to make it. I have to put it out there, and it does become its own thing when it's out in the world. But yeah, it's definitely like a place that's filled with trepidation, and it's like something that I'm gonna probably have to contend with forever. But it's kind of out of my hands, I guess. It's an interesting space because I don't want to be like didactic and like this is what my work is about.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that you can just liberate yourself from. On the front end, so that you don't have to do that math.
Right. Hopefully it's like a process and I can get to where Shinique is.
Yeah, I mean, the work is finished by the viewer, so I'm not going to prescribe that to them or struggle with what they might think.
Got it.
I think for me, starting out, and all along, especially, I have to redirect the narrative about my work. There are certain words people want to use, especially at the beginning. It was very street. It's detritus. I hate the word discard. I let it go and let it slide for a long time, but I'm not picking trash and I'm not digging around. So, I mean, there's like this kind of constant redirecting of how it's spoken of. And the word levity is part of that. Because joy and levity and positivity and utopian vision is different than...
And I hear the struggle of it's finished by the audience, but if the audience does finish it in a way that you...
Yeah, but that's not the audience saying that. I'm not talking about the audience. This is writing. This is critics. This is people who put themselves in the position to dialogue about the work, write about the work
Got it.
in catalogs, in magazines, in newspapers, and blogs online, and you know, over the years, like here and there. You know, the mention of graffiti, which was 40 years ago, makes my work street. And sometimes that's more marketable. So, I guess that's a different
So
type
you're
of
okay with that?
what?
So you're okay with that?
No, I didn't say that. I said this is what I'm struggling with. We understand that, right? Okay. Yeah. So those are the things that, as far as putting the work out, that I, negotiate.
Can I share one thing that
Yeah.
I'm finding really hard that maybe resonates a little bit with what you said too, is that so in the housing world, you hear the slogan, housing is a human right all the time.
Yep.
And most people I meet will say, yes, housing is a human right. But then, can housing be a human right and also a commodity at the same time? And I kind of feel the same thing about the art world, right? Like, we want everyone to be an artist. We want art to be for everyone. But, can it actually function as a commodity with a market? And people, we have an astute analysis of racial capitalism, and we kind of know maybe some of the things that have to change. And are we willing, as change makers, to actually help bring that change into being, or to be able, how do we wrestle with that contradiction?
Exactly.
That's really a good point. I feel that public art is very important for that reason. And as an artist going into school programs and alongside exhibitions, or on the other hand, working with kids or working with communities alongside commercial endeavors, or is really important, because not everybody sees the work, and that's why there's a mural going by that's a mosaic. People see that as they're going to work every day, and maybe they might glean some inspiration or insight from seeing it, as opposed, they're both parts of the art world.
We're going to take the rest of our time to get some questions from our audience for our artists.